Have you ever tried to walk away from someone who made you feel like you were the only person in the world, only to discover that leaving them felt like trying to escape gravity itself? As if no matter how far you ran, some invisible force was still pulling you back. That's the trap of a narcissist. And if you've ever loved one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Today, I want to talk to the part of you that's still tethered to them. The part of you that wonders why it's so damn hard to move on. Because the truth is, this isn't just about love. It's about addiction, identity, and reclaiming the version of yourself that you almost forgot existed. Let's break this down together. When you first meet a narcissist, it doesn't feel like meeting just another person. It feels like destiny. Like the stars aligned, the universe conspired, and finally, someone sees you. They don't just notice you, they study you. They listen with an intensity that makes you feel like the most fascinating, most captivating person on the planet. And in those early days, it's intoxicating. They reflect back to you the parts of yourself that you've long wished someone would celebrate. Your kindness, your depth, your dreams, your wit. Everything feels amplified because they're applauding it. It's not just attraction, it's magnetism. The kind that makes you think, this is what I've been waiting for. And that's the cruel genius of it. Because from the very beginning, they're not falling in love with you. They're building an image of themselves through your eyes. They want your admiration, your awe, your complete surrender. So they present a version of themselves that feels like perfection. It's a carefully curated performance. Every compliment, every gesture, every intense gaze is designed to make you feel like you've stepped into the pages of the love story you always thought was out of reach. That's why even when things start to go wrong, you keep chasing the beginning. Because the beginning wasn't just good, it was everything. But here's the part that's hardest to accept. That magical start wasn't real. It was real to you, but it wasn't real to them. And that's devastating. Because it forces you to grieve something that felt authentic, that felt sacred, but was, in truth, a sales pitch. A pitch designed to make you invest everything, your heart, your energy, your faith. So when people ask, why can't you just move on? They don't realize you're not just moving on from a person. You're trying to mourn a dream that was sold to you on credit. A dream that, when you try to collect, is already gone. But it gets deeper. After the fairy tale phase comes the storm, the slow, creeping replacement of affection with criticism, connection with distance, praise with contempt. And you barely notice it at first because they don't rip the love away, they ration it. You start to notice their moods, their silences, their disapproval, but you tell yourself it's just a bad day, or that they're stressed, or that maybe you've done something wrong. You start working harder to please, harder to understand, harder to recreate that magic you once had. And then, just when you're about to give up, bam, they flood you with affection again. A compliment here, a tender moment there, a night where it feels like everything is back to the way it was. And you feel relieved, like you can breathe again. But that's not love. That's control. That's intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological principle that keeps people playing slot machines even after losing over and over. Because every so often you win. And that little win is enough to keep you playing. This is the trap. You become addicted not to the person, but to the version of them you glimpsed at the start. That version shows up just enough to keep hope alive, just enough to keep you doubting your own instincts, doubting your own pain. You start thinking, maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe if I just try a little harder, the person I fell for will come back. And every time you think you've got it right, they shift the goalposts. You begin to lose yourself in that chase. You silence your needs, your voice, your intuition, because nothing feels as important as keeping them happy, or at least avoiding their disappointment. You start to believe that their love is conditional on your ability to anticipate and adapt to their ever-changing moods. And that belief is a prison, because deep down you know something's wrong. But then you remember how it felt at the start, The way they looked at you, the way they made you feel like the most extraordinary person in the room. And you wonder, what if I walk away and they give that magic to someone else? What if the problem really was me all along? That's the cruelty of it. They make you question your worth, your sanity, your entire perception of reality. But let me tell you something with absolute certainty. It was never about you not being enough. It was always about their need to control the narrative, to keep you hooked by dangling love like a prize you have to earn. That love was never stable because it was never authentic. It was a manipulation. And the longer you stay, the more you internalize the belief that love is supposed to feel like this, like confusion, like striving, like not quite measuring up. That's why it feels impossible to move on. Because you're not just walking away from a person, you're walking away from the hope that one day they'll become who they promised to be. You're walking away from the addiction to potential, from the intoxicating highs, from the fleeting glimpses of the love you thought you had. But you have to remember, real love doesn't operate like a slot machine. Real love doesn't make you gamble your peace, your worth, your identity. You're not crazy for finding it hard to leave. You're human. You love deeply. You believed sincerely. And that says something beautiful about you, not something broken. There's a moment that comes in every toxic relationship where you look in the mirror and realize you don't quite recognize yourself anymore. It's subtle at first. Maybe it's the way your laugh doesn't come as easily, or how you find yourself hesitating before saying what's on your mind. You start second-guessing your words, your reactions, your needs. Not because someone directly told you to, but because, over time, you've been conditioned to believe that who you are is somehow too much, too sensitive, too demanding, too difficult. So you start to shrink. You start to mold yourself into the version you think will finally be accepted, finally be loved without punishment. That's the slow erosion of identity that a narcissist causes, and by the time you notice it, the damage feels deep. You begin to think back to the person you were before them, the one who used to speak up without fear, who used to trust their instincts, who laughed freely and loved openly. And yet, when you try to access that version of yourself again, it feels distant. Like remembering a dream you woke up from too quickly, the details slipping through your fingers. That's the devastating part. It's not just that you've been hurt, it's that you've been reprogrammed. Your compass has been thrown off, your sense of reality distorted, because you've spent so long walking on eggshells, trying to decode someone else's chaos while silencing your own truth. And that's why moving on feels like trying to walk without your legs. Because who you were has been so chipped away that you wonder if that person even exists anymore. The narcissist didn't just take your time or your love, they stole your reflection. They made you question the very things that made you you. Your kindness became weakness, your empathy became gullibility, your boundaries became flaws. So of course it feels impossible to leave. Because leaving doesn't just mean being without them. It means being alone with the hollow spaces they left inside you. But here's what you need to hear. That version of you isn't gone. It's buried, yes, beneath the layers of confusion, self-doubt, and pain. But it's still there. That person who loved fearlessly, who laughed loudly, who knew what they wanted. That person is waiting for you. Waiting for you to choose them again. Every time you say no to someone's disrespect, every time you listen to your gut instead of their gaslighting, every time you assert a boundary, that's you digging yourself out. That's you reclaiming your reflection. And the next layer to understand is even more insidious, the trauma bond. It's the invisible chain that keeps you tied to someone who hurts you, even when every logical part of you knows you should leave. Trauma bonding happens when cycles of abuse are mixed with intermittent moments of kindness, creating a powerful emotional hook that's almost chemical in nature. Your brain gets wired to seek relief from pain by running back to the very source of it. And that is no accident. Narcissists know exactly when to throw you a crumb of affection, just when you're starving for it, just when you're about to walk away. They pull you back in with an apology, a compliment, a promise that feels different this time. And because you're desperate for the version of them you first fell for, you take the bait. It's a cycle that makes you feel crazy. One minute you're furious, ready to leave, and the next you're back in their arms, convincing yourself that maybe you overreacted, maybe it's not that bad, maybe they really do love you after all. And every time you go back, the bond gets tighter, the confusion gets deeper. Your nervous system starts associating the chaos with connection, the highs with love, the lows with normalcy. That's why the thought of leaving feels like withdrawal. Because in a way it is. You've been conditioned chemically and emotionally to need them, even when they're the very person causing your pain. But here's what's crucial. Understanding this dynamic is not just an intellectual exercise. It's liberation. When you realize that your attachment isn't love, it's survival, it changes everything. Love shouldn't feel like survival. It shouldn't feel like constantly proving your worth, like managing someone else's moods, like being grateful for scraps of kindness. That's not love. That's bondage. And breaking that bond starts with awareness. Every time you feel that pull to go back, to justify, to forgive without accountability, remind yourself, this is not love calling, it's the trauma bond. It's your brain seeking relief, not your heart seeking connection. And that's where the power lies. Because once you can name it, you can fight it. You can start to replace the craving for their approval with the need for your own peace. You can replace the highs of their affection with the steady warmth of self-respect. You didn't lose yourself in one day. You won't find yourself in one day either. But piece by piece, boundary by boundary, truth by truth, you rebuild. You reconnect with the parts of yourself that were silenced, shamed, or hidden. And with every step, the bond weakens. Until one day, you wake up and realize, you don't miss them. You miss the illusion. And that's a grief you can survive. Because beyond that grief lies something far more powerful, the rediscovery of you. There is a fear that lives quietly inside of so many people who've been in a toxic relationship. The fear that if you leave, you'll never find something better. It's the voice that whispers when you're lying in bed at night. What if this was my last chance? What if I'm walking away from the only person who will ever love me? And when you've invested years of your life in someone, when you've bent and folded yourself to fit their needs, that fear doesn't just whisper, it screams. Because deep down, you've been made to believe that love isn't supposed to feel easy, that real love is this constant uphill climb, this endless battle to prove yourself worthy. And leaving, that feels like giving up on something sacred, like admitting that the story you've told yourself, the one where they change, where they realize your value, where everything finally clicks, that story isn't going to happen. That is the fear of starting over. It's not just the fear of being alone. It's the fear of not knowing who you'll be without them. Because even though they hurt you, they became the reference point for your life. Every decision, every dream, every plan was somehow connected to them. So when they're gone, it's not just the relationship that ends. It's the version of the future you thought was waiting for you. And that's terrifying. We're not just grieving a person, we're grieving the imagined life, the milestones that will now never happen, the holidays that will never be shared, the quiet moments that now have an empty space. And if you've been with a narcissist, that fear is even more intense because they trained you to think that no one else will want you the way they did. They didn't just insult you, they strategically chipped away at your confidence. Little comments disguised as jokes that made you question your attractiveness, your intelligence, your worthiness. And after enough time, you start to internalize it. You start to believe that maybe they're right. Maybe you are too much. Maybe you are too difficult to love. And so the thought of starting over doesn't feel hopeful, it feels exhausting. Who would want to get to know me now with all this baggage, all these scars? But here's the truth that no one tells you. Starting over is not about finding someone else to love you. It's about learning to love the parts of yourself that you were taught to hide. It's about standing in front of the mirror not to see who they saw, but to see who you really are underneath the armor you've built to survive them. Starting over is about choosing you, not as a placeholder until the next person comes along, but as the person worth investing in, worth nurturing, worth loving first. Because when you rebuild from that place, love stops being something you chase and starts being something you attract. And yet, even when that truth is clear, there's another layer that keeps people stuck. The shame. The deep, gnawing shame of having been fooled, of having fallen for it, of having believed in someone who turned out to be a mirage. That shame can be brutal. It whispers, "How could you not see it? How could you be so blind, so naive, so foolish?" And the weight of that shame keeps you quiet. It makes you hesitant to tell your friends the full story, to admit just how bad it got, to confess the ways you compromised yourself because you didn't want to lose them, because saying it out loud feels like admitting weakness. But let me tell you something, there is no shame in loving deeply. There is no shame in wanting to believe the best in someone. That ability to see potential, to believe in change, to hold on to hope, that is not a flaw. That is your strength. That is your compassion, your generosity of spirit. And yes, it got used against you, but that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you cared. It means you gave. And that is nothing to be ashamed of. The only shame would be staying silent, staying stuck, because you're too afraid of how it will look to admit the truth. But you need to know that speaking the truth is the first step to getting free. Saying out loud, "I was manipulated. I was used. I was hurt." That is not weakness. That is power. That is ownership. That is you taking back the narrative of your life. Because here's what's even more dangerous than being fooled. It's refusing to learn from it. When you allow yourself to face the truth, to sit with the discomfort, to ask the hard questions, what did I ignore? What needs did I abandon? Where did I shrink? You don't just become smarter. You become stronger, more resilient, more discerning. And that strength ensures that the next time, you won't fall for the same mask with a different face. You didn't stay because you were stupid. You stayed because you're human. Because you wanted to believe in love. Because you were hoping. And that's okay. But now it's time to hope for something else. To hope for yourself. To believe that starting over isn't a punishment. It's a privilege. It's the chance to rebuild not just your life, but your faith in your own judgment, your ability to choose better, your right to be happy without compromise. You don't owe anyone the story of your shame, but you owe yourself the story of your survival. And every day you wake up and choose yourself, every day you decide to heal, to grow, to learn, you're rewriting that story. And that is a story worth telling. One of the cruelest realities about loving a narcissist is that you never get the closure you desperately crave. Not the real kind. Not the kind that lets you walk away with peace in your chest and clarity in your mind. And that's because true closure requires something they're incapable of giving. Accountability, remorse, empathy, an honest reflection of their behavior and how it impacted you. But a narcissist won't offer that. Because to do so would require them to admit that they weren't the hero in your story. It would mean confronting the harm they caused, the damage they inflicted, the person they broke down piece by piece, and that would threaten the very identity they've built for themselves. And so, instead of closure, what you get is silence. Or worse, gaslighting. A rewriting of the story where suddenly, everything was your fault. You were too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional, and what happens next is devastating. You start chasing explanations, chasing understanding. You replay conversations, dissect arguments, trying to pinpoint the exact moment where things went wrong. As if there's a secret code that, once cracked, will finally make sense of it all. But there isn't, because a narcissist doesn't operate by the logic of love. They operate by the logic of control, ego, and preservation of their own image. And once you stop serving that image, once you stop feeding their ego, they discard you, or worse, They punish you for needing more than they're willing to give. This is where people get stuck. They wait for closure as if it's an external gift, as if it's something the other person holds the key to. But that's the trap. Because waiting for closure from a narcissist is like waiting for a storm to apologize for the destruction it left behind. It's never going to happen. And the longer you wait, the longer you keep yourself tied to a story that only ever served to keep you small. Real closure comes from within. It comes from the decision to stop waiting for them to make it make sense. It comes from accepting that not every chapter ends with a tidy bow or a satisfying conclusion. Sometimes closure is messy. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to say, I don't need your permission to heal. It's the moment you stop asking why and start focusing on what's next. Because the truth is, their inability to give you closure says everything about them, and nothing about your worth. You get to close the door. You get to decide that their silence, their blame, their indifference is not the final word on your story. And that decision, that choice to grant yourself closure, that's where your power lives. That's where you start reclaiming not just your peace, but your agency. But here's the final piece, the part that truly sets you free. After the closure, after the grief, after the pain comes the hardest, most essential work of all. Rebuilding trust. Not in other people, but in yourself. Because that's the most damaging wound a narcissist leaves behind. The rupture in your self-trust. The voice that says, how could I have let this happen? How could I have stayed so long? How did I not see it? And those questions don't just echo in your mind. They live in your bones. They follow you into new relationships, new friendships, new opportunities, whispering that maybe your judgment can't be trusted, that maybe you're too blind, too naive, too hopeful. But let me tell you this, you are not broken because you were deceived. You are not foolish because you loved. Trusting someone is not a weakness. Believing in love is not a flaw. What matters now is not the fact that you were fooled, but what you do with that lesson. Rebuilding trust in yourself is about understanding that your intuition was never wrong. It was just silenced. Every time you felt that knot in your stomach, that discomfort in your chest, that nagging sense that something wasn't right, you were right. You just didn't have the tools, the clarity, or the confidence to act on it then. But you do now. And that's the gift of surviving them. You come out sharper, wiser, more attuned to the red flags you once explained away. You start to recognize that love doesn't come with conditions, with ultimatums, with manipulations disguised as affection. You begin to honor your boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as gates that protect your peace. You learn to listen to your own voice above the noise of someone else's expectations. This isn't about building walls around your heart. It's about strengthening the foundation beneath it, so that when love comes again, and it will, you meet it with a full sense of who you are, what you deserve, and what you will no longer tolerate. You'll trust yourself to see people clearly, to hear the difference between love and control, to feel the difference between peace and anxiety. Because at the end of it all, moving on from a narcissist isn't just about leaving them behind. It's about returning to yourself. The self that knows intuitively that real love doesn't feel like chaos, that the right connection doesn't make you question your worth, and that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. That's where your future begins, not with them, but with you. If any part of this touched you, if you saw even a fragment of your experience in these words, then you are not alone. And your story isn't over. Tell me in the comments, which of these points hit home for you? What part of this journey are you still navigating? Let's open up this conversation together, because healing doesn't happen in silence. If this resonated, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe for more conversations that light the path back to you. And if there's a topic or a question you're wrestling with, drop it in the comments. Let's make this a space for growth, for truth, and for power reclaimed.